What you need to know is that it involves two characters, centers around them. The narrator is Walt, and he's a music critic. Think sort of like in the Pitchfork vein, I guess, sort of pseudo-intellectual. And his antagonist, or so he thinks, is Keaton, who's an emerging singer-songwriter who sort of one of the princes of the San Francisco music scene. It's like the one story I have about San Francisco. Okay, so their past is that Walt and Keaton went to the same high school in a small town in Wisconsin. Keaton was a few years behind Walt, and was really good friends with Walt's younger brother. Walt's younger brother and Keaton, their senior year of high school, were involved in a car crash. Walt's younger brother was killed. Keaton walked away. So Keaton sort of fled Wisconsin and went to the West Coast and sort of wandered up and down the coast, took an obscene amount of drugs, and tried to sort of, make something of this really horrible thing that happened to him. He's recently had some success in doing so. He's getting sort of that critical buzz that certain bands get, I guess. And Walt has now come to San Francisco just before Keaton's about to start recording his breakthrough album. And Walt has come to essentially ruin his life. The story is called Lost Coast. Oh, I should say one more thing. Walt, just before this scene, has stopped in the Haight for some pharmaceuticals. The session started at 4 the next afternoon and was set to run till 4 that night. Keaton and I got off the streetcar downtown and walked among the shambling deco buildings. We stopped at a run-down building, went through an unmarked door, and up several flights of stairs. Gleaming hardwood floors, banks of electronics steadily blinking, a huge console with sliders and knobs, like something NASA would have used before computers shrank. The studio was immaculate. In the control room, the engineer was sunk in the broken-down middle of a ratty couch, eating a bucket of KFC, a microphone he'd been fiddling with cradled in his lap. "What up, Brody?" Keaton said, doing a complicated handshake with the engineer. "Ready to get this shit started?" He introduced me as a friend from back home. "This is the A-room," Keaton said, showing me around with obvious pride. "Need board, 2-inch tape, plate reverb, no mid mics. They don't use this stuff much anymore, no one can afford it." He reached down and twisted a knob on the console, lost for a moment in its beautiful complexity. "The record company gave us a little chunk of change, but it's still only good for a day in here." 15 minutes later, the band started to file in, carrying guitars and drums, an accordion, a celesta, a glockenspiel, a zanzithophone. "All right, boys," Keaton said, "this is Walt, an old buddy from back in Wisco. Bass, what's poppin', Holmes? Lead guitar, cool to meet you. Drums, whoa, firm handshake, hey man, I need that hand to play with. Bass, to beat off with, you mean? Keys, winds, accordion, glock, guitar, everything else. Yeah, same fucking difference. Wisco, Wisco, Wisco. How is it hanging, Walter? Mr. Music Critic, better write some good shit about this shit." They were your typical bunch of wasters, long-haired, glassy-eyed disciples of their instruments who could break your heart with a string bend, a rim click, a doubled lead, who in 10 years would probably be redoing the siding on your house. Seeing the way they shrugged their way into the live room to begin setting up and tuning, I felt the urgency again. How long had I wanted to explain to people? There were no ideas in music, only touch and instinct and sometimes grace, the mechanical virtues. And that among those who were given the tools, only a few, a scant few, would be able to tell you something true. I tried to teach John these things, how to dismiss all the false prophets. In the control room, Keaton was drinking his peppermint tea. He tipped his head back and massaged his throat. He looked like a baby bird feeding. The engineer went into the live room and started positioning mics. Keaton dogged his every move. "I want this to sound live," he kept saying. I want tons of bleed and like 0 overdubs. I want to hear the room, you know, the wood. Finally, everything was set up. The band gathered in a loose circle, Keaton in the middle with his jazz master slung over his shoulder. The engineer leaned back in his chair and set the tape machine rolling. "All right, fellas," he said through the talkback. "How about a little first take magic?" "Let's run the Hot Chick song," Keaton said to his band. He told me he never named his songs until they were recorded. 2, 3, 4. The drummer flubbed the very first entrance. Everyone in the live room laughed. Nerves. They couldn't afford many mistakes like that. Keaton counted it off again. The song was about a hot chick Keaton had seen once at Rickshaw Stop. The lyrics were throwaway, an expression of sexual longing and potency that fell away in the last verse to affirm his reignited faithfulness to his girl. The song had B-sides stamped all over it. Hearing it, you wondered why you wasted your own words trying to describe this libidinal shaft. And then the slide guitar took the melody and ascended into the chorus. The bass pedaled on its E string, the drums dropped into a loose halftime shuffle. Keaton's voice wavered on the last note of, "No babe, no, I ain't looking back." And all your objections quietly slipped away. The engineer turned to me. Pain in my ass, but he sure can ride a hook. They ran the song a few more times, then came in for the playback. "Hell yes," Keaton said, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Listen to that motherfucking reverb. Phil Spector would cream his pants if he heard that shit." Keaton danced around the room, only pausing to make himself more tea. "No," I said, "I'll get it for you." The next 2 songs came easy, a countrified romp with MIDI sax solo, then a slice of fuzzed-out psychedelia about making love in the Marin County headlands. The playing loose and confident, the groove huge, woolly, and barking on the low end. How far a band can come in a year. Everything hits harder. There's no searching, just this vast canyon of sound that suddenly opens up before you. And Keaton's voice. On the EP it had been reedy, slightly metallic sounding, hemmed in by the conical confines of the lighthouse they'd recorded in. These vintage tube mics opened things up. The way he threw himself past the boundaries of his range, the ragged falsetto that lapped heedlessly over the volume thrown up by the band, the throaty little yelp with which he ended every phrase. He'd fry his voice in 10 years if he kept up like this, but right now he was dashing ahead, lost in the thrill of being pursued, stumbling joyously, scoffing at what quarried him, knowing that with every step he was gaining. Keaton called County B Submarine the title track. He looked through the glass at me, nodded. So he did want me here. He was using me, not for exposure, but to bring that hopeless loss and terror home again. The song began with a tricky acoustic line that got even trickier as the electric started to wind around it. This was the sort of thing easily solved with overdubs, but Keaton insisted on the purity of live takes and the parts bleeding together on tape. Oh yes, he was old school, all the way. The engineer switched on the talkback. "Want to try that again?" "It's D sharp on the second change," Keaton told his guitarist. "No man, it's D." Keaton played through it by himself. "Yeah, you're right. What the fuck, I've played this 1,000 times. That probably wasn't an exaggeration. "They start off okay," the engineer said to me, "then get self-conscious. They'll settle down after a while." After a couple more takes, they got through the intro. The band snuck in, vamping on a claustrophobic diminished chord. Night started to gather. The road wound ahead, funneling you into the inevitability of the verse. All possibilities narrowed down to one. Keaton's voice climbed high, perched on a height, teetered. He sang about old grain silos and shuddering fields of grain, about a vast great lake shimmering, white geese landing on its mirrored surface. As they played, Keaton stared at me. He was singing about our home. And though I'd heard all these lyrics before, I understood now how far he'd traveled. For him, that home was the afterlife, where he could never go, and his friends were still traveling along one endless road, searching for the border, never reaching it. "And if you go over," Keaton sang, and I had to swallow a hard knot in my throat, "I'll go over too." Then, in the middle of the bridge, he stopped, waved his hands. Stop, stop, stop. What's up? The engineer said. It doesn't feel right, Keaton muttered. He turned to the keyboardist. What about arpeggiating that sus chord? And maybe play it on the Rhodes, not the Hammond? The keyboardist shrugged. I guess. They shuffled things around, played the song again, but the take sounded limp, lusterless. Keaton made more changes. At one point, he sat down behind the drum kit and showed the drummer what to play. They ran the song again. It fell apart in the first chorus. Fuck, Keaton said. I just hear it different in here, you know. He tapped the side of his skull. This room is fucking with me. He pressed ahead. He didn't want to waste any time. He was paying $900 an hour to use this legendary studio. They ran the song again. Another train wreck. All right, Keaton said, shaking his head. Let's take a break, chill out, drink a couple beers. I was just about to say that, the engineer said over the talkback. The band straggled into the control room. They listened to the playback on County B. I could see their ears perk up. The second take was it. Until Keaton stopped in the bridge. Maybe we could dump it into Pro Tools, splice together a vocal, the engineer said. No digital, Keaton insisted. We get this in one take. Let's just play it like we always do, the bassist said. The rest of the band agreed. They were tired now, disheartened. It was past midnight and they'd been playing for 6 straight hours. Yeah, Keaton said, sipping his tea, a clouded look on his face. Yeah, let's do it like always. I've been watching all this in silence, but now I pushed myself off the couch, reached into my pocket. Fellas, I said, pulling out a Ziploc bag and unrolling it. Maybe these will help. The mushrooms were gnarled and desiccated. A sickly gray-yellow, almost pulsating with poison. They gathered round. Holy shit, the bass player said, his jaw hanging open. Oh man, I shouldn't play fucked up. What are you talking about? You're stoned right now. Shit, those are some serious looking spores. You know, scientists say psilocybin came here from space on a fucking meteor. There's a giant mushroom floating in the center of the galaxy like a giant brain, and it's communicating with us through the shrooms. Man, you've been reading those websites again. They're mellow, I said, glancing over at Keaton. Come on, you guys sound tight. You need to get that feeling, that spontaneity. Keaton looked on, wavering. And it had worked before. He'd made the EP under the influence. I could almost tell myself I was trying to help him, that his longing for purity would be his undoing, that no one wanted to hear a perfect album anyway. Why not indulge in amateurism again? The moment arrived when he should have told his band no, and then it passed. Fuck it, the bass player said, reaching in and grabbing a couple stems and a couple caps. We need to loosen up some. They divided the bag in 4. Kay, you want some? Keaton couldn't look at me. I couldn't look at him. But it didn't matter what he did now. The decision had been made for him already. I'd been spiking his tea for hours.